History tends to be shrouded in secrecy, and some states have more evil tales than others. Today, between Colorado City cults, ghosts in Arkansas, the Alaskan Triangle, and more, it's about damn time to get a shovel for all this buried history. So let's get into it. For centuries, historians who investigated Jamestown had to rely on written accounts from the time in later historical documentation. For example, the legend of Pocahontas and John Smith was wildly romanticized through a white male Anglo-Saxon prism. Jamestown was a powerful symbolic legend, first of a new world claimed for the English Empire, then later the birth of a new nation. There was a strong motivation to enhance the legend with colonialist, patriotic, and religious fervor. But recent research, archaeological findings, and scientific documentaries have revealed shocking details and grim, actually horrific, realities of settlement life and death. Could it be possible that a foundation settlement of the American nation was rife with intrigue that included crypto-Catholicism in an anti-Catholic settlement, starvation, assassination attempts, and even killing and people-eating? Well, archaeological findings seem to indicate exactly that. Recent digs that started about 20 years ago at Jamestown have revealed shocking facts about life there. So archaeologists unearthed something stunning in structure number 191, which contained a brick and mortar oven of a kitchen. First, they found skeletal remains of dogs, cats, rats, and even a horse in the kitchen area. But then they found something even more shocking. The mutilated skull and severed leg of an English girl dating from about 1609. The skull and tibia bone both had numerous cutting and sawing marks on them, indicating that the body had been butchered. In addition, the back of the skull was smashed open, indicating that the skull had been bludgeoned, presumably to get at the brains, which are high in protein and eaten customarily from other butchered animals by the colonialists. The winter of 1609 was known as the starving time at Jamestown, and this was from a number of written accounts. During that time, of the about 600 total folks, only 60 people survived. Immediately next to the skull, a pottery bowl was also unearthed, indicating that all this was done at that kitchen. In fact, colonists could not have picked a worse time to try and settle in Virginia. Cores drilled from centuries-old trees near Jamestown by the archaeology team show that it was in the middle of a 7-year drought. The previous winter had been nearly as bad, and a lot of settlers had died of starvation. So it was during this time that John Smith ventured out in search of locals willing to provide the colonists with food. When he returned, he found that about 75% of the folks that had landed already starved to death. Desperate, a lot of folks decided to try to sail back to England on the small British ship, the Discovery, but Smith, trying to keep the colony afloat, aimed one of the fort's cannons at said ship and actually killed some of the defectors. In one of America's first trials by jury, Smith was condemned to the rope necklace, and by some accounts, he even had the rope there when Captain Newport sailed into the harbor with new settlers and stopped the whole end-of-life thing. Apparently, if you're visiting Colorado City, Arizona as just a random tourist, you're going to be followed by several white SUVs. Folks have reported getting a weird vibe driving through and seeing all these half-built compounds and people just staring at you creepily as you drive by. Well, I was checking the Wikipedia page. Turns out it's basically run by a cult. At least 3 Mormon fundamental sects are said to have been based in this area. A majority of the residents and many local officials belong to the most prominent of these groups, the Fundamental Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, whose corporation also owned much of the land within and around the town until state intervention in the 2000s. Direct quote, folks. A sect of Mormonism that broke off from the main church because they were excommunicated for refusing to renounce polygamy, because apparently the mainstream Mormons abandoned the practice. And they do a lot of horrible stuff. Men are not allowed to have intercourse with their wives, and the only people allowed to do so are seed bearers who essentially attack women. People have been kicked out and made homeless for simply disagreeing with the church leader. These folks have been accused of some really bad crimes we can't talk about, both in the US and in Canada. In January of 2004, local leader Warren Jeffs expelled a group of 20 men, including the mayor, and gave their wives and descendants to other men. Jeffs, now a convicted predator, stated he was acting on the orders of God, while the men expelled claimed they were being penalized for disagreeing with him. He was eventually placed on the FBI most wanted list, like the top 10, and arrested on August 28th of 2006. Most of the property in the town was owned by the United Effort Plan, a real estate trust of the FLDS, for short. In 2007, the state authorities began dismantling church ownership of the land, and the church retaliated and indoctrinated their followers against the state, believing they were being targeted because of their beliefs. So the followers became further and further secluded as a result. Remaining members refused to believe the charges against Jeffs, by the way. On April 6th of 2010, law enforcement officials in a nearby county of Arizona and Washington County of Utah served 5 search warrants seeking records from town officers. And these warrants were served on government officials and departments, including the town manager, as well as the only fire chief, which Yikes! As a result of the initial warrants, the Department of Public Safety was shut down, and emergency responders were prohibited from responding to calls without the approval of county officials. That's a big deal. On March 20th of 2014, a jury heard a local case that ruled that the towns of Colorado City and local other cities had discriminated against locals Ronald and Ginger Cook because they weren't members of the FLDS church. They just moved there. So these folks were awarded $5.2 million for religious discrimination. They'd moved to the area in 2008, but were refused access to the utilities of the town because, well, they weren't part of the FLDS. After all that, how about a more simple ghost story to cleanse the palate? One from Arkansas. So back in 1931, a railroad worker named Lewis McBride allegedly killed his supervisor from the Missouri Pacific Railroad. The foreman had fired McBride for an infraction, and some claim that McBride had intentionally manipulated a piece of track to cause a train crash. Seeking revenge for being fired, McBride killed his former boss by bludgeoning him with a railroad spike. Authorities arrested him, and he went the way of electrocution. So not long after McBride's death, a mysterious moving light began appearing along the train tracks, far from the highway. People have witnessed it many times since, and even the TV show Unsolved Mysteries documented the phenomenon. Experts say that according to documentation in the local paper, which didn't give a date, but it was somewhere in 1932, there was a lot of reports of people seeing a light on the track. The story was that when they found one person, he had a lantern in his hand, and yeah, he got chased, and that was the end of his life. So the light, nowadays seen only at night, has been described as either a yellow, red, blue, or white glowing light. You would see this tiny light, said Bob Thompson, the local Historic Association president. What we saw was kind of a reddish golden light. Looked like someone had a baseball cap with a flashlight in it. Now Thompson said most of the time they would see the light and then would later vanish, but some folks have had more aggressive encounters. So what will scare you though is when it gets the size of a baseball cap, and sometimes you can see it swinging. Now it's not just coming at you, it's moving. And then pff, it disappears. So you say, well, I did that, fine, let's go back to the car. So you turn around and then it's behind you. And that's when you get scared. It's always in a place when there is no electricity around. It shows when it chooses to show up. And when it chooses for you to see it, you see it. Though there are some scientific theories to explain the occurrence, a lot of local legends attribute the light to the ghost of McBride, or of that of a different rail worker who lost their head in an accident and allegedly continues to search for his head. The tropical waters around Bermuda may feel like the opposite of Alaska's frigid wilderness, but both places have something in common: unexplained disappearances. Thousands of tourists, residents, hikers, and airplanes have vanished without a trace in a large area of land called the Alaskan Triangle, encompassed by Juneau, Barrow, and Anchorage. So in 2007, state troopers reported about 2,833 disappearances. For a state with a population of more than 700,000 people, this suggests about 1 in a couple hundred people disappeared, which that's a lot of people. So yes, there are many theories about this creepy phenomenon, some of which involve Alaska's unpredictable and often unforgiving environment, as well as, the sheer expanse of the landscape that can result in many lost travelers. According to local legends, the missing people likely fell victim to the Kushtaka, a race of shape-shifting otter people who lure humans away from civilization and transform their captives into one of them. And finally for today, let's talk about something interesting in history. Allegedly, parts of the incident that led to the US intervention in Vietnam never happened. After evading a torpedo attack, the USS Maddox reportedly engaged 3 North Vietnamese boats in the Gulf of Tonkin on both August 2nd and August 4th of 1964, according to the Pentagon Papers. Although without US casualties, the events prompted Congress to pass a resolution, allowing the president to intervene in the country. So talk of this status as a false flag for the US involvement in the Vietnam War has permeated public discourse almost since the time of the attacks, especially after the government admitted that the second incident involved false radar images. But after resisting comment for decades, the NSA finally declassified documents in 2005, admitting the incident on August 4th never happened. Those involved didn't necessarily intend to cover up the incident to propagate a war, but the evidence does suggest an active effort to make it fit the claim of what happened, according to historians. And that's it for me once again, folks. I've been Alexa, your resident ookie spooky girly. See y'all next time, you lovely spooky people.